And Tom, welcome to Big Hearing News. And the first question is, are you safe? Are you safer than you were? How are you?
I'm safer than I am, thank you very much. I'm currently actually in a hostel in Lviv, which is now doubling as a refugee shelter for people who are fleeing the other parts of Ukraine that are much more dangerous. Just to briefly explain, the western parts of Ukraine near the Polish border, they're the places that have seen the least fighting, although we did hear a couple of air raid sirens throughout the day, so it's not completely safe. But being here for the last few days, I have to say, was utterly crazy. There was um, rockets flying down. There was constant shelling in the streets. There were armed men everywhere. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life.
I'm reading reports as well that the Ukrainian government has said all men aged 18 to 60 kind of need to stand and take up their arms. Is that what you're seeing on the ground actually there? Are you, when you're moving west, moving away from there, is it all sort of the women and children who are going that way? And are the men literally staying behind in their houses ready to fight?
So the men aren't allowed to leave the country. Men aren't allowed to leave the country. Men have been issued weapons. They've been told they have to go and fight no matter what. They've been issued AK-47s and they've been given instructions on how to make Molotov cocktails. So yes, it mostly is women and children fleeing with. But as I said, I've spoken to many young women who said, I'm sorry, I don't want to leave my father, my brother, my husband on their own, and they've decided to stay. Many other women have decided to take up arms as well. There's a decent number of women in the territorial services and the volunteer brigades as well.
We were just talking, Jeremy and I. Oh, you go, Jeremy.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to ask. I was reading reports today that there's a 13-kilometer queue at the Polish border to get over the border. Is that going as smoothly as it can? Sort of the exodus to get people out of the country.
Well, you've got to remember that the kinds of numbers we're talking about. We're talking about literally millions of people who might be wanting to leave Ukraine. And so far, it has just been the case that there simply isn't the infrastructure available to get everybody over the border. Yes, it is true. I know people who walked for literally 20 kilometers trying to get to the border. And there have been actually some unfortunate situations where people of certain nationalities, African nationalities, South American nationalities, have been turned back. Poland has said that, oh no, you don't have the right passport or the way to enter, and they've actually been stuck in Western Ukraine, potentially waiting for the fighting to reach here. Now, it hasn't yet, but it could do within a matter of weeks.
Is that the biggest concern? Like, is from sitting inside, is Russia's plan to go right from the east all the way to the west? Is that what's being said? And then what?
Well, honestly, we don't know what Russia's plan is yet entirely, but it does seem like they've gone for a very, very maximalist assault on the country, right? So you have, people were thinking, okay, maybe they're only going to break out in the east. Maybe they'll try and make a land bridge from the occupied territories in the east, in the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics that they recognized as independent through to Crimea. But no, it seemed like they decided to go for a maximalist assault that would take all of Ukraine. Now, Western Ukraine doesn't have a huge amount of military utility, so we assume they probably decided to leave that till last. But it does seem like they're being very, very held down in Kiev and in Kharkiv and in other places. It does seem they're making a bit more progress in the south than would be hopeful, and it does look like there was a bit of a breakthrough in the Donbass region. But so far, the Russians are moving slower than expected, and it might mean that they come to the negotiating table before they're able to take these parts of the country.
I'm wondering, oh, you go, Jeremy.
Oh, no, I was going to ask, is there a sense they have announced that there are going to be negotiations on the Belarus border? Is there any sort of sense of hope that anything's going to come of that?
Well, yes, people are, at least in Ukraine, are optimistic. They think that their military defense has been successful enough, and it's given the Kremlin enough of a bloody nose so far that we really, really aren't. That there really is some kind of hope that there could be a diplomatic breakthrough that just didn't exist 3 or 4 days ago. That said, the worry that people have is that if they don't come to terms, the Kremlin still has a huge amount of really, really heavy firepower. We're talking about thermobaric, missile launchers that, look like they come out of I don't know, Call of Duty or something, but can inflict insane amounts of damage on civilian populations and in cities. And we know the Russians have been willing to use them before, as they did in Syria. Now, would they use them against Kiev, against Ukraine? That's an open question, but we just don't know for now.
What is happening in the civilian population, Tom? What are you saying? Because we're getting reports and seeing that there are some civilian fatalities. Is this indiscriminate? Is the attack happening everywhere? Or doesn't matter of the target, or are those civilians who are getting caught up in it the ones who are located in and around, for example, military installations?
Okay, so it seems that a few civilian targets have been hit, and there's definitely been cases of civilians caught up in the fighting, but there haven't been the huge scale civilian casualties that there could have been if they'd employed their like kind of maximalist strategy of, they just use their long range missile system to just kind of bomb the absolute hell out of, tower blocks and apartment buildings. And we know what this looks like because the Russians did it in Chechnya. The Russians also did it in Syria. And so far, they haven't done that in Ukraine, but it's only been 4 days so far. There's a school of thought that said, look, the Russians are going to be so angry that they've taken so many casualties that they didn't expect. They might decide to punish Ukraine in retaliation for its defiance, and that could look absolutely terrible. Or they could decide, we've messed up and we need to go back to the negotiating table and find a way to save face. It's anyone's guess as to which path they'll choose.
Hey, look, as a Kiwi coming from what is often said one of the most peaceful countries in the world, being New Zealand, this must be a total mindfuck for you. You hear stories about war correspondents, and you think Vietnam, you think World War II, and you think, what's been. How are you? I don't want to minimize the suffering that's happening with everybody else, but from a personal point of view, how are you handling this, and how are you dealing with this? What you're seeing and what you're having to report back?
Well, look, it's not my first rodeo. I have covered conflicts before. I was in Afghanistan for quite a while last year, and then the year before that, I covered the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. So I'm used to seeing, the kind of destruction and things that you do see in wars. I would just say that this is on a very, very different scale. And again, as I've spoken with a number of my correspondents, it was my choice to come here. It was my choice to do the work that I do. And for that reason, I can't honestly say that, it's my... I am more concerned for the people here who can't leave, who are stuck here, who this is their homes, than someone who came here by choice and their career. It is something that I do for a profession and that I'm rewarded for financially. So I don't want people to be having sympathy for me when they could be having sympathy for people in much more difficult situations who are still stuck in bomb shelters in Kiev in truly dire conditions.
Anything else, Jeremy?
No, I think that's it's incredible to hear from somebody who's right in the middle of it. It feels so distant for us, but at the same time, it's so immediate as well. It's terrifying what's happening there, and all I can say is stay safe and all the best with. Are you attempting to leave, or are you going to stay in Ukraine?
I have no plans to leave so far. No, I'll probably go to the border tomorrow because I want to do a series of stories about the refugees, but I have no plans to leave Ukraine yet. I may even attempt to go back east if the military situation stabilizes and there is a way to do so reasonably safely. But yeah, I feel I'm in for a penny and for a pound here.
Well, we need voices like yours, Tom. So stay safe, my friend.